On today's show, why young Houston Rockets center Alperen Sengun is playing at an all-star level, Jabari Smith Jr.'s evolving and growing offensive role in Houston, and what exactly is going on with Jalen Green. It's all coming up right here at Locked On NBA.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the biggest stories with the local experts. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And now it's me, Jackson Gatlin, host of Locked On Rockets, here to break down how a few of the Houston Rockets' young core pieces are either living up to and exceeding expectations this season or failing to meet expectations now that the Rockets are firmly in quote-unquote phase 2 of their rebuilding timeline, sitting at 15-12 here on the season, just as we are a little bit past a quarter-way mark of this NBA season. And the first guy here, the guy who means so much to this Houston Rockets team is none other than their budding all-star big man, Alperen Sengun. So why is Alperen Sengun thriving under new head coach Ime Udoka? How has he taken such a significant year 3 leap here? First off, a big part of it has just been he's got the trust of the coaching staff. He's been empowered by the coaching staff to be the best version of himself. There were times his first 2 years in the NBA playing under the previous coaching regime here in Houston where he was often marginalized, his role was minimized, he was benched in favor of other guys that were just not as good as him at the 5 spot. And now you're seeing a head coach who really, is able to identify his strengths and lean into them. Alperen Sengun is very clearly the Rockets' best player this season. He's putting up absurd numbers. He's basically averaging 20 points, 10 boards, and a little over 5 assists. He's a walking 20, 10, and 5 every single time he steps on the floor. He's coming off of his best game as an NBA player, dropping a career-high 37 points against the New Orleans Pelicans, who had no answer for him defensively, whether it was them throwing their big guy, Jonas Valanciunas, on him, or trying to throw a smaller, more versatile defender in Jeremiah Robinson-Earl. The Pelicans had zero answer for Alperen Sengun. He attempted a career-high 17 free throws, nailing 14 of them. And that's the crazy thing is offensively, he's going to generate such high-quality offense, either a high-quality look for himself down low in the paint, drawing free throws and getting to the charity stripe, or drawing a routine double team and being able to kick the ball out to an open shooter or at least get the defense in rotation, therefore generating an open shot for the Rockets offense. Ime Udoka has called him a calming presence for this Rockets team offensively. They've routinely gone to him late in games when they need a bucket, when they need a high quality possession. And that speaks volumes about how much the coaching staff really trusts him. But even though the numbers are incredible offensively, the biggest step that he's taken in his game this year is defensively. He has risen to the challenge that Ime Udoka has given him to be a better defensive player. In the past, I do believe his defensive limitations were largely overblown. He was oftentimes made out to be kind of the scapegoat for some of the Houston Rockets' defensive struggles the past couple of seasons. But now we're seeing Alperen Sengun effectively anchor a top 3 defense in the NBA because he's been given the opportunity to play through some mistakes, to learn from some of his shortcomings, and he's got a coaching staff that really does trust him and challenges him. It hasn't been all sunshine and roses. There have been moments where Ime Udoka has benched Alperen Sengun or has directly called him out for lack of effort or lack of energy at times throughout a game. And when those moments do happen, Alperen Sengun usually bounces back the very next game in a big way. So he has been the Rockets' best player this season. He has been a large reason for all of their success so far this season. Should he be an all-star this year? I think the case is pretty cut and dry. I think he absolutely has to be in the running for an all-star nod this season. You look at the big man competition around the NBA landscape, Nikola Jokic is in like a tier of his own at the top of the league. But then you've got, Joel Embiid, Anthony Davis, and you've got kind of maybe the next tier of bigs, right? The Bam Adebayos, Karl Anthony Towns, Domantas Sabonis. And I do think Alperen Sengun finds himself very squarely in that mix of kind of that next tier of big men. And I think he's probably even better than some of those bigs in that list that I just named off. Now, I'll let you decide where he falls in that scope. But The numbers speak for themselves. He's playing at an all-star level, and he's even got teammates campaigning for him to make an all-star team. Most recently, Tari Eason grabbing the mic after their win on the road in New Orleans.
Alperen Sengun is an all-star. I'm just letting everybody here know it. The Wizard is an all-star. You heard it here first.
But Alperen Sengun isn't the only young Houston Rocket this season who is growing into a bigger role for this Rockets team. Jabari Smith Jr., their third overall pick from the 2022 NBA draft, after let's face it, he had a rough rookie season. The Rockets were the NBA's dumpster fire. There wasn't a lot of structure. There was no identity here in Houston. And Ime Udoka came to Houston and brought this team an identity. And you're starting to see Jabari Smith Jr. really flourish and thrive with that defense-first, gritty mentality and identity that Ime brought to the Rockets. So Jabari's defense really started to take some serious strides this year. And then more recently, the offense is starting to really click for him. The offensive numbers have been pretty solid since early November. But over these last 3 games, Ime Udoka has decided to adjust his rotations and has really given Jabari Smith Jr. the reins in the second unit for the Houston Rockets, where at the top of the second quarter, top of the fourth quarter, it used to be kind of Jalen Green's show. It used to be those were the minutes where Jalen Green was supposed to run the second unit with 4 bench guys, and that was supposed to be his chance to just take over the game and score the basketball and do what he does, or do what he's supposed to be able to do best. And that has not been the case so far this season. More on that in just a moment. So the Rockets have pivoted and have given Jabari Smith Jr. the opportunity to get more touches, to become more of a focal point offensively, especially there with the second unit. But even with the starters, he's been given more of an opportunity. He's developing a great little 2-man game, playing off of their big man in the middle, Alperen Sengun. He's cutting a little bit more. He's getting to the mid-range, which is his bread and butter spot on the court. And the numbers have been insane over these last few games. He's averaging 27 points on 63% shooting and 60% from downtown, 91% at the free throw line over these last 3 games for the Rockets. He's just over 39% three-point shooting for the season. And he's really starting to look like the player that the Houston Rockets thought they were getting when they drafted him number 3 overall a little over a year ago, the player that was largely billed as being the consensus number 1 overall pick up until 48 hours before the NBA draft. He had a rough rookie season. He's really coming into his own now as an NBA player, and it's been some really exciting stuff to see. Now, the one major downside to this Houston Rockets season is, even though they're well ahead of schedule, they're playing above 500 basketball, sitting at 15-12 this year, and Ime Udoka has done a fantastic job turning this team around. And also credit to a couple of the veterans there in the mix, Fred VanVleet, Dylan Brooks, who have played very instrumental roles for this Rockets team, and also Jeff Green as well off the bench. The one sore spot here has been Jalen Green, who's become an incredibly polarizing figure amongst Rockets fans, because this Rockets team is only as good as Jalen Green is on a nightly basis. He's kind of the swing factor, the X factor for this team, where when he has a bad game and when he's not delivering what he's supposed to deliver, the Rockets do kind of struggle. And they're still able to eke out some wins. They're still able to grind out a win here and there like they did against New Orleans, where Jalen Green was frankly terrible in that game. He finished the game with just 9 points on 2 of 8 shooting, and he had 6 turnovers. He was benched midway through the third quarter and didn't play for the final 18 minutes of the game. Didn't see a second of action in the fourth quarter. Didn't play for half of the third quarter, and the Rockets have largely been a better team without Jalen Green on the court this season. They're about minus 10 points worth. It's like a minus 10 net rating when he is on the floor versus when he's off the floor for the Houston Rockets this season. It's been honestly really rough to watch, because he has regressed so much here in year 3 that it's becoming a pretty significant concern that we're entering kind of bust territory for Jalen Green. I have very cautious optimism at this point that he will figure it out, but the easiest way to describe it is he's a shooting guard that can't shoot the ball. He is so wildly inconsistent that even when it comes to just knocking down the wide open shots that Alperen Sengun or Fred VanVleet are generating for him offensively, he's not a reliable shooter. And the Rockets have too many other players that are way better at other things on the floor. If Jalen Green isn't scoring the ball, he's not bringing you enough. He's improved as a playmaker. He's improved as a defender. He gives good effort. But if he's not putting the ball in the hoop, the one thing that he was drafted to be able to do, there are better options on this Houston Rockets team and on this Houston Rockets roster, and we've routinely seen Ime Udoka opt to bench Jalen Green late in games to go with guys like Aaron Holiday or Tari Eason or Jeff Green, because they provide more to this Rockets team when Jalen Green isn't scoring the basketball. So the question really is, how much longer do the Houston Rockets continue to experiment with Jalen Green? How much more of a rope does he get before the Rockets ultimately pivot away from him, either by reducing his minutes or completely pulling him out of the starting lineup altogether, or at worst case scenario, potentially exploring trade options for him? There really isn't a concrete answer at this point, and there's not really an answer as to why he's regressed so much shooting the basketball. The only thing that I can come up with is that he's trying harder on defense, and he's not being given the carte blanche ability to just shoot himself out of a funk, because there are other players that provide more efficient offense more consistently on this team. So you'll see the team go to Jalen for half a quarter early in the game, or they'll try to get him going in the third quarter. And if it's not there, then they're back to their tried and true, go to Alperen Sengun, go to Jabari in the mid post or in the mid range, let Fred VanVleet run pick and roll. And those versions of the Rockets offense work well. It doesn't look great when it's being run through Jalen Green right now, but hopefully he'll be able to turn things around. Will Alperen Sengun become an all-star this season? How far can the Houston Rockets ultimately go with head coach Ime Udoka? I'll have you covered for all of that and so much more over at Locked On Rockets.